I didn't notice it at first. The ballroom at the Westlake Hotel had that expensive glow you can only get from dimmed chandeliers, spotless white tablecloths, and far too much money being poured into a single evening. Waiters moved in perfect formation between the round tables, balancing trays of champagne flutes and little plates of salmon on cucumber rounds. Somewhere in the background, a string quartet was doing its best to make the sound of 4 people playing Viva la Vida on violins seem like it belonged in a room where people were writing checks with more zeros than I'd ever seen on one line. Marissa was in her element. She always looked the most alive when there was a crowd she could navigate like a pro. One part hostess, one part strategist. Her laugh carried easily over the soft music, just loud enough to make her seem approachable without being unrefined. I'd seen her pull this off dozens of times. But tonight I wasn't watching her work the crowd. I was just watching her. She was seated next to me, angled slightly toward a city councilman she'd been chatting with for the past 10 minutes. One hand curled lightly around a glass of Pinot Noir. At one point she reached for her clutch, a slim silver thing that matched the shimmer of her dress, to grab a lipstick. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but as the flap opened and she rummaged inside, my eyes landed on 2 hotel key cards sitting neatly side by side. The kind you get when you check into a room, not the kind they hand out for a conference. Right beneath them was a folded sheet of paper, just visible enough for me to catch the bolded name of a hotel printed at the top. It wasn't the Westlake. It was the Mayfield, the boutique hotel directly across the street. The same Mayfield where, 2 weeks ago, my banking app had pinged me with a charge for dinner for 2 at their restaurant. Marissa had breezily told me it was a team dinner she'd covered because the company card had maxed out unexpectedly. The same Mayfield where, according to the piece of paper she'd just tucked her hand over, she had a reservation next Thursday night. The exact time she told me she'd be in a team strategy meeting downtown. I felt my stomach drop in that slow, heavy way it does when you've just realized you're seeing something you shouldn't. If this had been a year ago, I might have told myself it was nothing. I would have smiled, told myself I was overthinking, and gone back to nodding through a speech about the importance of community partnerships. But I couldn't unsee the date, the time, the name of that hotel, and I couldn't forget the receipt in my transaction history. She noticed me looking before I could look away, and the smile she gave me, it wasn't nervous or startled. It was casual, almost like she'd expected me to notice. "Oh, those?" she said lightly, tucking the clutch shut with a practiced hand. "The cards are for the volunteers. You know, the ones helping out with the event next week. I'm just holding on to them so nothing gets lost. And the reservation, that's for our guest speakers. I figured I'd just coordinate it all to save the committee some stress." She sipped her wine like it was the most normal explanation in the world. Her tone was so smooth it could have passed for truth without much resistance. I'd heard her give pitches to donors with less polish. I nodded, made some sound of acknowledgement, and kept my expression neutral. I didn't press her. But inside, a little switch flipped. I'd never been the kind of guy to snoop or track or cross-examine. I believed in giving the benefit of the doubt, maybe to a fault. But in that moment, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to take her answers at face value anymore. If there was something here, I'd find out. And I wasn't going to tip her off. The rest of the evening, I let the conversation flow as if nothing had happened. I laughed at the right cues, clapped at the end of the speeches, posed for photos when the event photographer came by. But I didn't stop noticing. Every time she got up from the table, I watched where she went. Every time she leaned in to talk to someone, I tried to see if her hand rested on their arm or if she angled her body in a way that suggested more than casual interest. Nothing stood out. She played her role perfectly, warm, composed, untouchable. But I kept replaying the moment in my head. 2 room keys for a hotel she didn't work with. A reservation that lined up perfectly with an evening she'd already accounted for. And a past expense that didn't fit the story she'd given me. One by itself could have been explained away. All 3 together, that was a pattern. After dessert, as we made our way through the crowded lobby toward the valet stand, she looped her arm through mine. Anyone watching would have thought we were the picture of a couple enjoying a night out. But I was thinking about those key cards, and how easily she'd shut that clutch without a flicker of hesitation. In the car, she talked about the success of the fundraiser, about how much the organizers had appreciated her help. I gave the right responses, kept my tone even, and didn't let on that anything had changed. But it had. Because now I wasn't just her husband at a charity dinner. I was a man who'd just seen the first piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. And for the first time in our marriage, I was ready to start paying very, very close attention. In the days after the gala, I told myself to breathe and hold my fire. Don't accuse. Don't invent. Observe. That became the quiet mantra I repeated while brushing my teeth, lacing my running shoes, logging into my banking app over morning coffee. Watch the facts, not the fear. The first thing I noticed was how her phone began living face down. It used to sprawl across the counter, screen lighting up with weather alerts and calendar nags. Now it rested like a sealed envelope, always on Do Not Disturb. When it did buzz, she'd slide it off the table with the casualness of someone removing a crumb. Spam, she'd say, or work chat, nothing. The glow of the screen became a kind of lighthouse I pretended not to see. Location services started going dark, too. We'd shared ours for safety after a snowstorm scare on Snoqualmie Pass. You keep that kind of thing because it lets you text, "You home?" without asking. Suddenly hers went blank in patches, like clouds drifting over a map. Battery saver, she said. My phone dies if I don't. Efficient, reasonable. Until the blackouts lined up with nights she had deadlines. Those deadlines multiplied. Weekends, mostly. Midnight sprints for a Monday deck no one would present until Thursday. I don't question hustle. I've pulled all-nighters for clients, but the pattern had a rhythm all its own. She'd take a tote bag to the car, promise she'd work in the guest room, then text me from the quiet building downtown because our place felt noisy. We live above a yoga studio that closes at 7. One afternoon, looking for a winter scarf, I found a shoebox tucked behind her sweaters. I thought it was receipts. It was tissue paper and new lingerie with tags like vocabulary I didn't speak. Not anniversary stuff. Not us stuff. The colors weren't her usual, and the styles looked less like something she'd wear under a blazer and more like something meant to be seen. I set it back exactly as I'd found it, then took a slow breath that didn't quite make it to the bottom of my lungs. The Mayfield kept coming up in odd ways, like a word you notice everywhere once you've learned it. She signed up for a gym membership near the office, which turned out to be 3 blocks from the Mayfield, not her office. Rideshare receipts kept repeating the same drop-off pin, a neat little blue tear in the map that sat right on the hotel's awning. She joked about loving the hotel's lavender candles after walking a colleague to her Uber. Jokes work better when the punchline doesn't repeat. Her chats with coworkers started thinning out, too. Not the cadence, she still typed fast, but the archaeology. Threads that should have been there weren't. It wasn't that I went through her phone. I never crossed that line. But shared calendars leave trails, and the project Slack on our home laptop shows fragments when you search for file names. I'd see a mention of a planning doc and then a jump cut to "Great, that works." As if whole spans of conversation had been boxed up and hauled to the curb. Passwords changed like seasons. Streaming. Utilities. The joint travel wallet. Each update arrived with a cheerfully opaque explanation. Security audit, she said, smiling like a flight attendant while fastening my seatbelt for me. I let it ride, added the new strings to my notes app, and realized I was living on guest access in my own life. Then there was the Women's Book Club, which met late in the business district like it was outsourcing the concept of cozy. Once a month turned to twice, and the group's texts, at least the bits she let drift into my line of sight, were logistics without titles. No dog-eared paperbacks on the couch. No stack of receipts from Elliott Bay Book Company. When I asked what they were reading, she said, an essay collection. The way you say a sandwich when you don't remember what was on it. Taxis, too. I don't usually check statements more than once or twice a week, but now I watch the timeline. Recurring rides, same pickup window, same destination radius. If I plotted them, they'd cluster like thumbtacks on a corkboard. Some stopped near a cross street I knew led to a rear entrance of the Mayfield. Service doors. Quiet, no chandelier. I tried to argue with myself to make an honest list of explanations. She really was coordinating volunteers. She really was hosting speakers. The hotel had the best happy hour in a 5-block radius. And yet the explanations only covered one piece at a time. Nothing knitted. Each patch left a seam. I started taking long runs again along the waterfront, headphones in but no music, letting the slap of my shoes do the counting. That was where the memories unspooled. The first time I noticed her turning her phone face down at dinner. The night she laughed way too hard at a text then apologized for an inside joke with the team. The conference in Portland where she came home with a hotel pen I recognized from the Mayfield's lobby like a souvenir from the wrong city. Even small things felt newly loud. A new perfume tucked into the cabinet, floral with a smoky edge that didn't match the bottle on her dresser. A dry cleaning ticket for a dress I hadn't seen her wear to any of our events. Receipts from the spa at the Mayfield, facial, aromatherapy massage. Billed on a Saturday when she'd left the house in running gear and returned with sore quads. I tried to give her the grace I would want. I also photographed the receipts and emailed copies to myself from a fresh address I created just for facts, no commentary. Her gym card pings showed late check-ins that didn't match her calendar. I know because I started opening the door to see what shoes she wore out. Running shoes one night, heels the next, with a hoodie pulled over them like camouflage. She called it habit stacking, gym plus sauna plus a protein shake. The receipt said treadmill plus spa plus 2 bathrobes charged to a room. I told myself bathrobes can be gifts. I also told myself lightning doesn't strike the same lobby twice. At home, int asterisk Macy turned into choreography. A kiss in passing, not in greeting. Her hand on my shoulder when she needed to get past me at the sink. When we did curl up on the couch, she angled her body so her phone could stay between us. A thin aluminum moon with its own tides. She started calling me babe more often. The way someone might use a nickname to smooth a conversation that shouldn't need smoothing. I kept a quiet ledger. Dates, times, locations. Not to use as a we asterisk p asterisk n. But so I wouldn't gaslight myself later with phrases like maybe I imagined that. There's a particular loneliness in gathering evidence against the person you love. You want to be wrong so badly you bargain with the obvious. A week after the gala, she mentioned a women-only networking dinner near the financial district. I nodded, then happened to glance at our shared car history later. 2 short trips that night, not one. The first ended at a parking garage by the Mayfield. The second started an hour later from the hotel's side street. Maybe she left something in the car. Maybe she took a call where it was quiet. Maybe. The word started to feel like a trapdoor. I remembered an old conversation on a Sunday morning, months back. She'd asked what I thought about emotional affairs, whether they count if there's no line crossed. We were still in pajamas, coffee steam lazily climbing between us. I joked that it sounded like a podcast topic. She'd laughed, then looked away, like she'd set a glass on the edge of a table and was waiting to see if it would fall. I didn't become a detective overnight. I became a historian. I started adding screensh asterisk ts to a hidden folder. Calendar blocks, rideshare pins, a gym email congratulating her for late-night consistency. I saved the innocuous text she sent about working through dinner, and the photo she posted of a book club pastry that I later recognized from the Mayfield Cafe display case. The details piled up until they felt less like grains of sand and more like a dune. What unnerved me most wasn't any single discovery. It was the way the air changed. A different temperature when she walked into a room. A careful choreography to how her bag never tipped. How her laptop closed when I stood up to refill my glass. Affection narrowed to efficient gestures. Forehead kisses, shoulder squeezes, the kind of touch you can do while reading an email. Our jokes shortened. Our silences lengthened. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I promised myself I wouldn't go off half-cocked. That if I brought this up, I'd bring facts, not feelings. The truth shouldn't need a raised voice. It should be able to stand on its own 2 feet and say, here I am. And if I was wrong, then the notes would be a private museum of my own insecurity, and I could delete the exhibit. But the puzzle pieces kept landing in the same corner of the table, and I could see the picture forming whether I wanted it or not. On a gray Tuesday, I opened my calendar and blocked the next meeting night with one line. Mayfield, observe only. No accusations, no heroics. Just eyes open. If the truth wanted to walk past me, I'd be standing on the sidewalk, ready to see it clearly. Thursday came with the kind of late spring drizzle Seattle is famous for, just wet enough to dampen your jacket, not enough to justify an umbrella. I left the office early, citing a late conference call, which was technically true. I had a meeting, just not the kind I was paid to attend. Marissa's team strategy meeting was set for 6:30 p.m. downtown, which was convenient for me. The Mayfield Hotel stood directly across from a little cafe with wide front windows and the sort of strong espresso you could sip for an hour without anyone rushing you out. I picked a table at the back, far from the entrance, where I could watch the street in the reflection of the glass without looking like I was casing the place. The minutes ticked by. I nursed a cappuccino I didn't taste, trying not to check my watch every 30 seconds. At 6:18, a yellow cab pulled up to the curb. I knew her silhouette before my brain had time to confirm it. Long coat, hair swept up in a loose twist, the kind of heels she only wore when she wanted to make an impression. She wasn't alone. Cole stepped out behind her. I'd met him twice at company events. Both times he'd shaken my hand with that overly confident grip, the kind that tries to assert something before words even start. Tonight he was smiling like a man who'd already won. They didn't rush. The rain wasn't enough to push them inside. Instead, they lingered on the sidewalk for a moment, speaking quietly, her head tilted toward him in a way I'd seen 100 times in our marriage, just never directed at someone else. Then came the hug. It wasn't quick or polite. His hand settled at the small of her back like it belonged there. Hers stayed on his shoulder even after they stepped apart. My pulse thudded in my ears as they crossed the street toward the Mayfield. No hesitation, no detour. At the revolving door, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a key card. He did the same. They didn't stop at the desk. They knew exactly where they were going. I watched their reflections vanish into the mirrored elevator doors. I stayed put. My instincts screamed to follow them, to storm across the street and demand an explanation. But that wouldn't give me what I needed. I wanted certainty, the kind that couldn't be brushed away with volunteer rosters and guest speaker schedules. An hour passed. I ordered another coffee I didn't want. The rain streaked the glass, turning the city lights into smears of color. At 7:42, they returned. The change in them was subtle but obvious to anyone looking. Marissa's hair was down now, a few strands clinging to her cheek. She traded her coat for a soft cardigan I'd never seen before. Cole was dressed more casually too, shirt untucked, jacket slung over his arm. In her other hand, she carried a glossy bag from the Mayfield spa. So did he. They laughed at something as they stepped back into the drizzle, walking close enough that their shoulders touched. At the corner, a car pulled up, another taxi. She slid in first, Cole right after her. The door shut. The cab disappeared into the wet blur of traffic. I sat there another 10 minutes, forcing myself to breathe. There was no angle left to misinterpret. The time, the place, the company, the shared access to a room, the casual return with spa bags. It wasn't a meeting, it wasn't event prep. It was exactly what it looked like. Back at home, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I hung my coat, left my shoes by the door, and went about my routine like it was any other Thursday. She came in just after 10, hair damp from the rain, cheeks flushed. "Long night," she said, setting her bag on the counter. "Yeah," I replied. "Mine too." She smiled like she hadn't heard the double edge. Then she kissed my cheek and went to shower. I watched her go, the image of her with Cole replaying in my head, frame by frame. In the living room, I pulled out my phone. I saved the time-stamped photos I'd taken from my seat at the cafe. The two of them stepping out of the cab, the mirrored elevator, the spa bags. Each image went into a folder I'd started after the gala. It was the first time I'd looked at my wife and known, without any sliver of doubt, that she was living a second life alongside ours. And now I had the proof to match the suspicion. The morning after the Mayfield, I woke before my alarm and stared at the ceiling until the room shifted from slate to gray. There's a kind of quiet that follows certainty. It isn't peace, but it's stable, like a dock after the storm has already passed through. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started a folder called Facts. No rage, no conclusions, just a place to put what I could prove. I copied the screensh *TS, the spa bags, the mirrored elevator, the cab timestamp. I exported bank statements and marked every Mayfield charge in yellow, every late-night ride in blue, every gym visit near the hotel in red. I took the paper receipts from the counter and photographed them against the day's newspaper because some future version of me might need the date in a frame. Then I emailed it all to a backup address I'd never used for anything else. At 8, I called a law office a friend had once mentioned over beers. The receptionist's voice was gentle in that way people reserve for car wrecks and hospital waiting rooms. "We can see you at 10, she said. I printed my spreadsheet and put it in a manila envelope labeled simply, Timeline. Marissa padded into the kitchen in a robe, smelling faintly of eucalyptus and hotel soap. "Morning," she said, casual as ever. "Morning." I didn't meet her eyes. She poured coffee. "Big day." "Yep." I rinsed my mug and grabbed my coat. "I'll be working from a client's office." At the firm, the attorney listened more than he spoke. When he did, he kept it plain. Keep communication in writing, secure personal accounts, do not confront without a plan. Washington's community property rules, he explained, care less about stories and more about evidence. I slid the envelope across the table. He didn't flinch. "Start with boundaries," he said. "Then we'll talk settlement." Boundaries. The word felt like a fence I could actually build. That afternoon I opened our banking app and turned joint into divided. Utilities stayed, the mortgage stayed, but subscriptions, cards, and travel wallets split cleanly down the middle. I set up alerts for withdrawals over $50. I changed passwords on my email and cloud storage, enabled two-factor authentication, and revoked every old device that still had a ghost key to my accounts. At home, I moved my essentials into the second bedroom. Laptop, a week's worth of clothes, notebooks, running shoes, and the fax folder. I typed an email I never thought I'd write. Subject: Next steps. For the time being, let's communicate by email only. I will not discuss relationship matters in person. I am initiating a separation. I will work with counsel on a proposed plan for property and finances. Please do not delete or move any household documents. I hit send, then went for a run along the waterfront until my lungs burned and my head quieted. Her reply was quick. "I don't understand what's happening. Can we talk? Please don't do this over email." I typed back, "Email is fine." The next days were procedural. I scanned titles, policies, retirement statements. I took time-stamped photos of every room and every piece of furniture. When she tried to corner me in the hallway, I stepped aside and pointed to my inbox. My attorney drafted a separation proposal that looked like a receipt for our marriage. Columns for accounts, rows for furniture, footnotes for equity. I sent it without commentary. Her reply came hot. "This is extreme. We can fix this. Please meet me for dinner." I wrote back, "I will not meet in person. Please send any edits in writing." That night, I boxed our wedding photos. No fire, no drama, just cardboard and tape. Within a week, we had a signed temporary agreement. Separate finances, a rotating schedule for who slept where, no visitors, no removing major items without consent. It didn't feel like justice, but it felt like breaks. From there, routine did the heavy lifting. I ran the Elliott Bay Trail, worked, answered only essential emails, utilities due, packages delivered, your mother called. I cooked simple food, read until my eyes softened, and went to bed alone in the second room with the window cracked so I could hear the waves. The settlement came faster than I expected. We traded bullet points like colleagues finishing a project. She kept her car, I kept mine. I'd refinance the condo. She'd take the bedroom set. I'd keep the couch. Retirement accounts split by formula. We scheduled a notary like we were booking a dentist. On signing day, rain streaked the conference room windows. She looked smaller, or maybe I was just seeing the absence of the story I'd been telling myself. I wrote my name steady and clean. The notary stamped. That was it. That night she emailed, "If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'm around." I replied, Please let me know when you'll pick up your remaining boxes. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a museum of almost. I moved my desk to the window, learned to cook for one without expecting a second plate, changed the lock code, not as a barricade but as a boundary. Some mornings I still woke reaching for the left side of the bed, but the ache came with clarity. The early warning signs weren't a test I failed. They were information I finally honored. It turns out you can rebuild a life from ordinary materials. Receipts, calendars, routines, and the discipline to refuse being baited back into the past. I'm not through it, but I'm on my feet. That counts for a lot. 2 months after the settlement, the silence in my life stopped feeling like an absence and started feeling like space. Evenings were no longer a minefield of half-truths and strategically angled phones. They were mine. I'd cook dinner without rushing, read for an hour without glancing at the door, run until the light bled out of the sky. It was during one of those runs along the waterfront that I saw the flyer. A local community project needed volunteers to restore a neglected section of the urban garden by the ferry terminal. I'd walked past it countless times. Broken planters, weeds clawing up through cracked brick, and thought it was a shame. Now, it felt like a chance to put my hands to something that could actually grow. On my first Saturday there, the sky was that washed-out silver Seattle wears like a favorite sweater. A dozen volunteers milled around with gloves and trowels. That's when I heard her laugh. I turned and saw Amanda. At first, I didn't place her. Then it clicked. She'd been one of Marissa's college roommates, someone I'd met twice at distant reunions. Back then, she was studying environmental science and wore her hair in a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it. Now, she had a baseball cap and work boots, and a way of smiling that made the morning feel warmer than the sun could manage. "Jason?" she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Wow, I almost didn't recognize you without a plate of hors d'oeuvres in your hand." I laughed. Really laughed, the kind that felt unpracticed. "Yeah, I clean up okay, but I pull weeds even better." We ended up assigned to the same row of planter boxes. Between clearing roots and hauling fresh soil, we talked. Not the polite, polished chatter I'd been used to in my old life, but real conversation about books, about the ferry rides she took to her teaching job on Bainbridge, about how she'd started volunteering here because it felt good to make something better with her own hands. The hours slid by. At the end, our gloves were muddy, our shoulders sore, and there was a clean stretch of earth where chaos had been. She offered me a thermos of coffee she'd brought, just in case. We sat on the low wall, steam curling between us, watching the gulls wheel over the bay. Over the next few weeks, I found myself looking forward to those Saturday mornings. We'd share tools, trade music recommendations, laugh about the stubborn weeds that seemed to have PhDs in survival. Sometimes we'd grab lunch after, nothing fancy, just sandwiches or pho from a place nearby. There was an ease with Amanda I hadn't realized I'd been missing. No silent punishments, no conversations with hidden hooks. If she was tired, she said so. If she disagreed, she told me why. I didn't have to scan her tone for landmines. One afternoon, while stacking bags of mulch, she mentioned knowing about the divorce. "I ran into Marissa a few months back," she said carefully. She didn't give me details, but I could tell something was off. I braced for pity, but she just shrugged. "People make choices. All you can do is make better ones for yourself." It was the most refreshing thing anyone had said to me in a long time. We started texting during the week, links to articles we thought the other would like, bad puns about gardening, the occasional photo of a project half-finished with the caption "needs supervision." I caught myself smiling at my phone, which was strange and good all at once. It wasn't romantic, not then. It was light. And after months of living in the shadow of suspicion, that light felt almost like oxygen. One Saturday, rain drove the volunteer crew into the garden's small toolshed. We sat on overturned buckets, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs. Amanda told me about the class she was teaching on urban sustainability and asked about my work. I realized I hadn't talked about my job in any detail for months. Not because I didn't want to, but because there hadn't been anyone I trusted to actually listen. When the rain eased, we stepped outside. The garden glistened, every leaf beating silver. She looked around and grinned. "See? Even after a storm, it's better than before." It was a simple observation, but it landed somewhere deep. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes in myself. I checked my phone less. I slept more. I found myself cooking again. Not just reheating, but actually trying new recipes. Sometimes texting her a photo of the results. The weight I'd been carrying felt lighter. Not because it had disappeared, but because I wasn't holding it alone anymore. One evening, after a long day, I sat on my balcony with a beer, watching the ferries drift across the water. I thought about how Amanda treated people, how she treated herself, without the constant calculation I'd grown used to navigating. That's when I understood the contrast. In my old relationship, I'd been conditioned to measure every word, to anticipate every shift in mood. With Amanda, there was no scoreboard, no hidden agendas, just presence. I didn't know where it was heading, and for once, I wasn't in a hurry to define it. What I did know was that I could breathe again. And after everything, that felt like the clearest sign I was finally walking toward something worth keeping.